This ain't your range, girl." The colonel chuckled, his voice dripping with mockery, certain this was nothing more than a joke. But the smirk drained from his face when his eyes caught the rifle in her hands, its wooden stock carved with 69 kill marks. His jaw locked, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple as he whispered, "Dear God, she's real." Around them the room froze, soldiers exchanging stunned glances, realizing they had been laughing at a legend. Each mark was a life taken at distances no ordinary man dared attempt. The silence grew heavy. The joke was over. She wasn't just a clerk, she was the ghost. What happens when the underestimated woman reveals 69 reasons to fear her name? This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The air in the armory was thick with the scent of metal and oil, the hum of fluorescent lights. Overhead, almost drowned out by the muffled sound of boots scraping against the concrete floor, a few soldiers meandered around, casually inspecting weapons, their voices a distant murmur that barely rose above the clinking of rifle parts. It was the quiet before the storm, the calm that preceded the chaos of training and drills. Adriana Cole stood at the workbench, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she cleaned the barrel of a sniper rifle. The weapon's metal gleamed under the harsh light, but it wasn't the shine of the steel that caught her attention. It was the weight of the rifle, the one weapon she knew better than any other, the one that had served as both her ally and her burden. She wasn't just cleaning this rifle, she was remembering it. Each pass of the cloth along the barrel, each meticulous motion was a reminder of the battles fought and the marks left on her soul, marks that weren't visible but etched deep within. Her hands never shook as they had once before. Not when her past resurfaced in her mind, not when memories of far-off deserts, enemy lines and high-stakes shots flashed behind her closed eyelids. Her breath was steady, her mind clear. But still the feeling of the rifle in her hands brought it all rushing back, the weight of the past. The door swung open, and a pair of boots hit the floor with a loud, deliberate thud. The sound cut through the silence, pulling Adriana from her thoughts. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. She'd been expecting him. Colonel Marcus Hale stepped inside the armory, his boots clicking with authority as he surveyed the space. A tall figure, with salt and pepper hair that betrayed the years of service he had under his belt, Hale had an aura of quiet command. His eyes, sharp and calculating, moved across the room, taking in everything, every soldier, every weapon, every detail. But it wasn't the colonel's arrival that set Adriana's pulse quickening. It was the way his gaze fell on her, not with the usual dismissive glance he gave to anyone in the armory, but with something deeper, something more calculated. He had noticed her. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as if measuring her, weighing her, assessing her in ways she'd seen before, but never this close. He walked over to her station, where she had finished cleaning the sniper rifle and was now assembling it with mechanical precision. "You're still doing this, huh?" Hale's voice was low, almost a mockery, but it held no warmth. It was a challenge wrapped in a question. Adriana didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned the rifle in her hands, ensuring the scope was properly aligned, her movements sharp and calculated. "This is the second time I've caught you here, Cole," Hale continued, crossing his arms over his chest. His posture was casual, but his eyes were anything but. They were piercing, scanning her every move. "What's the deal? You're not qualified to be messing with these weapons." Adriana paused, finally meeting his gaze. She hadn't expected this. He had always been indifferent toward her, just another civilian contractor to him. But today, something was different. There was an edge in his voice, a certain curiosity. "I'm just cleaning up, Colonel," she said evenly, her voice level, her expression unreadable. She made no attempt to explain herself, knowing full well that words would do little to deflect the growing tension in the air. Hale snorted, a cynical chuckle escaping him. "Sure you are. That's what they all say." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving her. "You ever actually fire one of these things, Cole? Really fire it, not just clean it?" For a split second, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. He wasn't mocking her anymore. His tone had shifted, curiosity seeping in where sarcasm had once lived. He was genuinely interested. Adriana's fingers tightened slightly around the barrel of the rifle. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but she felt it. The weight of the weapon, the weight of what it represented. And for a brief moment she was back there, on that ridge, in the desert. But she pushed the thought aside. This wasn't the time. It never was. "I'm better with paperwork than firearms, Sergeant," she said, her voice steady, a practiced smile flickering on her lips. It was the same line she'd used a dozen times before. A harmless deflection, one that made her seem more ordinary than she really was. But Hale wasn't convinced. His eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity she wasn't used to. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Funny," he said, "you don't strike me as the paperwork type." Adriana remained silent, refusing to break. She had learned long ago to keep her cards close to her chest, especially in front of men like Hale, men who prided themselves on knowing everything, on seeing through the surface to the hidden truths beneath. Just as Hale opened his mouth to speak again, a new presence entered the room. It wasn't just any officer. General Richard Vance, a legend in his own right, stepped through the door, his presence undeniable. There was a slight change in the air, an almost imperceptible shift as the room grew tenser. Vance was known not only for his tactical brilliance, but also for his uncanny ability to spot talent, or more accurately, to uncover what others had hidden. His eyes swept over the room with the calm of someone who had seen it all, but when they landed on Adriana, they didn't look away. Instead, they lingered just a moment too long. Then his lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Marcus," Vance said, his voice deep and deliberate, "I see you've met our paperwork expert." Hale turned toward Vance, clearly taken aback. He had expected Vance to brush off the comment, but there was something in his gaze now, something sharper. Adriana had never seen him like this before, and the realization hit her like a truck. The general knew, and he had known for a long time. "So," Vance continued, taking a few steps closer to Adriana, "I hear you've been spending some extra time with our sniper rifles." Adriana straightened, the sharp click of her boots on the concrete flooring snapping the room into focus. She didn't flinch. She didn't show anything. Her gaze met Vance's, as calm and unwavering as a soldier standing before her superior. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she said, her voice crisp. But there was a shift in her expression, an almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw that was visible only to those who had seen her operate before. Vance didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied her for a long moment. It was as if he was measuring the very air between them, calculating the weight of each word before he spoke it. Finally, he nodded slightly. "Let's see how well you handle it, then." The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time in a long while, Adriana felt the familiar stirrings of something raw in her chest. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the last time she had stood in front of a firing line. It wasn't fear. No, it was something far more dangerous, the sense of being seen. Colonel Marcus Hale's eyes hadn't left her, and now, with General Richard Vance standing beside him, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just another day at the armory anymore. This was different. "You know," Hale began, breaking the silence, his voice still carrying that skeptical edge. "I've seen a lot of soldiers, a lot of contractors, but something about you. You don't belong here." Vance stood a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Adriana, his expression unreadable. It was as though he were waiting for something, waiting for her to slip, to give something away. But Adriana wasn't about to do that. Not now, not ever. "You're wrong, sir," she replied, her tone cool, level. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The words landed with a quiet finality, and Hale's expression shifted, his lips tightening. He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered on her, a slight furrow in his brow, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his gaze. He was sizing her up, just like everyone else had always done, but he was wrong. Adriana had spent years perfecting the art of blending in, hiding behind the mundane, behind the ordinary. She had learned how to fade into the background, how to become invisible to the eyes of the world. It had kept her safe. It had kept her sane. But now, standing in front of these two men, it was clear that her time of anonymity was coming to an end. Vance stepped forward, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Let's put that theory to the test, shall we?" The general's words hung in the air like a challenge, and Adriana felt the weight of them pressing down on her. This wasn't just a test of skill anymore. It was a test of something far more dangerous, trust. Hale turned to Vance, his expression now a mix of confusion and curiosity. "You're not serious, are you? She's just a clerk?" Vance finished, his voice a low rumble. "I know exactly who she is, Marcus, and I know exactly what she's capable of. She's more than that, much more." Adriana's heart rate remained steady, but inside, the gears were shifting. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep the act up, how much longer she could pretend to be just another cog in the machine. It was only a matter of time before they discovered the truth. The real truth. Hale was silent for a moment, his eyes flicking between Vance and Adriana. He seemed to be weighing the situation, his mind ticking through possibilities. Finally he sighed, a resigned look crossing his face. "You want to test her?" Hale said, his voice tight. "Fine, but I still don't buy it. I've seen too many civilians come through these doors, and none of them could handle what we put our people through." Vance nodded slowly. "We'll see about that." Without another word, Vance gestured for Adriana to follow him. The general moved toward the far end of the armory, where the training area was set up. Hale trailed behind them, a skeptical frown etched on his face. Adriana, however, didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what this was. An opportunity, a chance to prove herself, to show them that they were wrong, to show them that she wasn't just a civilian, not anymore. As she walked, her boots clicked against the concrete, the sound echoing through the room. She could feel their eyes on her, could almost hear their thoughts racing ahead. They were all wondering the same thing. Could she do it? Could she really back up the stories they'd heard about her, about Ghost? The door to the training area swung open, and the cold air hit her like a slap. It smelled like sweat, oil, and the faint, metallic scent of gunpowder. The space was large, filled with rows of targets, sniper nests, and various obstacles designed to mimic real-world combat scenarios. "Get into position," Vance instructed, his voice commanding yet calm. "We'll start with something simple." Adriana nodded once, moving toward the rifle racks. She didn't need to look. She knew exactly where her weapon would be, at the far end among the others waiting for her. She reached the rack, her fingers brushing the smooth wood of the stock as she pulled the rifle free. It felt like home. She slid into the familiar stance, adjusting the scope, her fingers expertly tightening the bolts, her mind already calculating the angles, the wind speed, the distance. She had done this 1,000 times before, but there was something different this time, something sharper. Behind her, she could hear the sound of footsteps, the shuffle of boots on the floor. Hale was watching, Vance was watching. The weight of their gaze felt heavy on her shoulders, but she pushed it aside. She didn't have time for doubt. Not now. Adriana placed the rifle on the bench and adjusted the scope once more. The target was set, an enemy soldier at a range of 200 meters. The usual drill, nothing too complex. She had handled far worse. But the pressure was mounting. They were watching, waiting for her to fail. "Ready when you are," Vance called from behind her. Adriana didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already locked her focus on the target, her world narrowing, down to the small, distant figure standing still in the distance. She could feel the air shifting, the pressure of the wind against her face. She felt the cold bite of the air, the way the wind tugged at her clothing, but it was all just background noise now. There was only the target. She took a breath, slowly, steadily. Her finger hovered over the trigger. It was a feeling she knew all too well, a moment of pure focus. The rest of the world fell away. There was no hesitation, no doubt. There was only the shot. And then, with a smooth squeeze, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the rifle's discharge echoed in the training area, and Adriana's eyes flicked to the target. The bullet hit dead center, the mark a perfect circle. She lowered the rifle, taking a slow breath as she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of approval from both men, but there was something more in their silence, something deeper. "You missed one thing," Hale said, his voice no longer mocking. It was something else now, something closer to respect. Adriana turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "I didn't miss," she replied, her voice steady. "But you're starting to see me, Colonel. You're starting to see the truth." Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Vance as if seeking confirmation. Vance gave a small nod, his eyes never leaving Adriana. "You're right," Hale finally muttered. "But don't think this changes anything. You still have a lot to prove." Adriana smiled faintly. "I'll prove it, all of it. Just give me the chance." And as the weight of his words settled in, Adriana couldn't help but feel the faintest spark of satisfaction. She had done what she needed to do, but she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The air in the training hall felt different now. A subtle change had settled in, more than the usual hum of machinery or the buzz of chatter from the soldiers. It was the shift that came with the realization that something bigger was unfolding. Adriana could feel it in the way her boots clicked against the floor, in the sharpness of her movements. It wasn't just about the training anymore, not anymore. The Colonel's skeptical stare still lingered in her mind. There was a certain respect now, uneasy, hesitant, but it was there. But it wasn't Hale that Adriana was worried about. It was Vance. The general had known. From the moment they'd locked eyes, there was no denying it. He knew her, or at least he knew parts of her. And that knowledge made her skin crawl more than she cared to admit. Adriana stood still for a moment longer than she needed to, her fingers still resting lightly on the rifle. She had hit the target with precision, the way she had done 1,000 times before. It wasn't the shot that was different, though. It was the audience. These were men who lived in a world of sharp edges, where power and prestige were currency. And now she had something they wanted. Something they couldn't ignore. "Good shot," Vance said, his voice breaking the silence, but that was just the warm-up. Adriana didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead as she placed the rifle back in its case with the same care she had always used. She had been here before, stood in front of men who doubted her, challenged her, and watched as they fell silent when she proved them wrong. But she wasn't here to prove a point. She was here for something much bigger, and it was starting to feel like the clock was ticking louder with every passing second. "What's next?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it now. She wasn't the same Adriana who had stepped into the armory earlier. Vance studied her for a moment, his hands folded behind his back. He wasn't smiling, but there was a glimmer of something. Maybe admiration, maybe curiosity. Hard to tell. "The next step isn't about just firing at targets," Vance replied, his voice steady. "We've got a real mission coming up, something that's been in the works for a while now. And it's time for you to prove if you're really as good as they say you are." Adriana nodded slowly, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She had been waiting for this. She had been waiting for someone to stop treating her like just another contractor, like just another cog in the machine. Now the real game was about to begin. "Mission?" Hale's voice broke in, sharp and wary. He had been quiet for too long. "What mission?" Vance turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Something that requires more than just your standard issue tactics. It's a delicate operation. We need someone who can think outside the box, someone who's used to the kind of pressure that doesn't come from just pulling a trigger, someone who can handle the situation without getting bogged down by the chaos." Hale looked at Vance, then back at Adriana. His expression was tight, unsure of what was unfolding. But there was a hint of disbelief in his eyes, like he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that a civilian contractor was being called on for something beyond inventory checks and weapon maintenance. "You're serious?" Hale finally asked, his voice skeptical again. "You want to send her on some high-level mission?" Vance didn't hesitate. "Yes, I am. She's the only one I trust to get the job done." Adriana could feel Hale's eyes burning into the back of her neck, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. He was still trying to figure her out, trying to find the cracks in the armor. He wasn't wrong to be cautious. Anyone in his position would have questioned it. But this wasn't his call. It never had been. Vance turned back to Adriana, his tone shifting from casual to commanding. "You'll be briefed soon, but I need to know if you're ready for this. This isn't just about taking out targets. This is about more than just the mission. This is about controlling the narrative, making sure we come out on top, no matter the cost." Adriana met his gaze without flinching. "I'm ready." Hale grunted, clearly frustrated, but unable to argue with the general. He turned and walked away, muttering something under his breath about protocol and procedure. But Adriana didn't care. She had already moved on. Vance gave her a small nod. "Good. I'll have the details sent to your quarters. Get your gear ready." As the general walked off, Adriana stood there still. The air felt thicker now, the weight of the mission pressing in on her chest. She could feel the familiar coldness creeping back into her veins, the calm before the storm. She had always worked best under pressure, but this time it was different. The stakes were higher, the consequences far more severe. She wasn't just hunting terrorists anymore. She was hunting something else, something that had followed her for years, lingering in the shadows, and now it was time to face it head-on. The next few days passed in a blur. Adriana spent most of her time in the armory, preparing her gear, making sure everything was in perfect condition. She wasn't going to risk failure, not this time, not when the weight of everything she had left behind was on the line. It wasn't just the mission that made her nervous, it was the people involved, the ones who knew who she really was, and they weren't the only ones watching. The operation was going to be a high-risk, high-reward mission with no room for mistakes. It was the kind of assignment she had trained for, the kind that only the elite were chosen for. And yet, here she was, a ghost of her past, thrown into the heart of a deadly game. She didn't know who else would be on the team, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to make damn sure she was the one who walked away from this with everything intact. As the days drew closer to the mission, Adriana's mind raced with plans and contingencies, each one more complex than the last. But even with all the preparation, there was always one lingering thought. At the back of her mind, what if they really knew who she was? What if they were preparing for something more than just a mission? The morning came too quickly. Adriana had barely slept, though she didn't mind. There was always a strange energy in the quiet hours before the storm. It was the stillness that made her feel alive, the calm that wrapped around her before the chaos began. And it was in these moments that she could almost convince herself that she was just another person. Just Adriana Cole, a woman who cleaned rifles, filed reports, and lived a life that no one would look twice at. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She hadn't just been hiding from the past, she had been running from it. And now, that past was closing in on her once again. The mission had been briefed in a way that left little room for uncertainty. But Adriana knew better than to assume anything was as simple as it seemed. When Vance had walked into her quarters with the details, she had listened closely, her gaze steady, her face giving away nothing. The mission itself wasn't the part that had her uneasy, it was the people involved. It was the knowledge that, somehow, they had connected the dots. And that connection led straight to her. As she prepared her gear, each movement felt like muscle memory. Automatic. She packed her personal firearm, ensuring that it was within reach. Then came the sniper rifle, her constant companion, the one that had seen more action than anyone could possibly imagine. She had cleaned it a dozen times before, but this time she wiped it down with the care of someone preparing for their last fight. The silence in her room was deafening. There was no sound except the soft scrape of cloth against steel, the slight click of components sliding into place. It was a peaceful kind of chaos, a ritual she had perfected. She had been a sniper, a ghost for years, but she had never been prepared for this. The mission would take her into hostile territory, a fortified compound on the outskirts of an isolated region. The target, a high-value asset who had information that could change the course of the war. But that was just the cover story. The real reason she was going in was to eliminate a threat that knew too much, a threat that had been watching her every move. She didn't know who else would be on the team, but she had learned to trust her instincts. In this world where allegiances shifted like sand, trust was a rare commodity, and she wasn't about to give it away too easily. The briefing had been blunt: infiltrate the compound, neutralize the target, and extract with the intelligence. Simple enough on paper, but the reality of it was far more complex. She finished assembling her gear and checked the time. Hale would be expecting her at the extraction point within the hour. The mission was set to go down tonight, and there were no second chances, no room for error. Her thoughts shifted back to the time when she had been part of a different world, a world where failure was not an option. The high-stakes nature of her previous life had shaped her into who she was now, but it had come at a cost. The quiet moments were where the weight of that cost sank in. Adriana had learned to compartmentalize. She had learned to separate the past from the present, but there were still pieces of her that she couldn't lock away. Every assignment, every mission came with its own price. And tonight's mission had a cost that was higher than she cared to admit. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her gear one last time, her reflection caught her off guard. She didn't recognize the person staring back at her. The face was familiar. The brown hair pulled back, the sharp features, the calm, collected expression. But the eyes, they were different. The eyes told a different story, one that only she knew. They had seen things, done things that most people could never imagine, and that look, the one that spoke of secrets buried deep, was what had kept her hidden for so long. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her reverie. She picked it up, and the message on the screen was clear: meeting point at 1800 hours. Be ready, and no mistakes. It was from Hale. His tone was businesslike, but there was a slight edge to his words. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone. But that didn't matter. What mattered was getting the job done. And Adriana was more than capable of doing just that. The drive to the extraction point was quiet. The streets were nearly empty, the city seeming to hold its breath before the night unfolded. Adriana sat in the back of the military transport, her eyes scanning the surroundings, her mind running through the plan once more. The plan was simple, but the execution would be anything but. They were going up against a highly fortified compound, and the target was no ordinary asset. The intel they had gathered pointed to a man with ties to several underground organizations. That had been responsible for some of the deadliest operations in recent years. And then there was the matter of the man himself, Dmitry Orlov. Orlov had been on her radar for years, ever since she had been stationed in the Middle East. He was a ghost, a shadow moving through the darkest corners of the world. A man who knew how to survive, how to disappear, and how to strike when no one expected it. He was a ghost in the truest sense of the word, someone who knew how to make others disappear without leaving a trace. But now the ghost had a name, and that name was the key to everything. Adriana's mind raced as she thought about the mission ahead. The team had been briefed on the target's location, but what they hadn't been told was why this mission was so important. The intel Orlov had could change everything. It could end the war or escalate it to a point of no return. And that was the part that made her nervous. Orlov wasn't just a target, he was a symbol of everything she had fought against. The past she had tried to bury was coming back to haunt her. And the people who had sent her into this mission didn't care about her past. They cared about the result. As the transport vehicle made its way through the city, Adriana's thoughts shifted once more to her past. To Syria, to the decision she had made, to the shot she hadn't taken. It had haunted her for years. The faces of the men who had died because of her hesitation still burned into her memory. But this time, there would be no hesitation. No second guessing. She was going to finish this. She was going to take Orlov down, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone stop her. The vehicle finally arrived at the drop-off point, a quiet alleyway hidden behind a few buildings. Adriana stepped out of the transport and looked around, her eyes quickly adjusting to the darkness. The wind was cold, biting, but it didn't faze her. She had been through worse. The team was waiting for her, their faces shadowed in the dim light. There was no need for words. Everyone knew their role. Adriana stepped forward, her rifle slung over her shoulder, and the team began to move. They had one mission: eliminate the threat. And as they made their way toward the compound, Adriana felt that familiar coldness wash over her. The mission was clear. The stakes were high, and this time there would be no mistakes. The quiet of the night wrapped itself around Adriana as the team moved swiftly through the shadows. The compound ahead loomed like a fortress, a silent, imposing monolith made of stone and steel, its high walls and barbed wire a clear warning to anyone who dared approach. Every step they took was calculated, deliberate. The moon hung overhead, casting a cold, unforgiving light on the barren landscape. The snow crunched beneath their boots, but it was the sound of the wind, the sharp, biting wind, that kept Adriana on edge. They had made it to the outer perimeter without incident, but she knew this was just the beginning. The hard part was yet to come. The rest of the team was moving into position, their eyes scanning every corner, every possible vantage point. There was no room for mistakes here, no margin for error. The entire operation hinged on the element of surprise, on getting in, completing the mission, and getting out without leaving a trace. But the deeper Adriana ventured into this operation, the more she felt the weight of her past closing in on her. It was like a shadow hanging over her, never fully gone, always just behind her. As they approached the compound's outer wall, Adriana's mind was already working, calculating. She could feel the pressure building. Her breath was steady, but her pulse was quickening. The sniper rifle resting against her back felt heavier now. It wasn't just the weapon, it was the responsibility that came with it. Every shot had consequences, and tonight, every shot would count. She crouched low, moving silently toward the wall, her eyes flicking back and forth between the shadows that clung to the buildings and the faint light from the compound's security cameras. The team had split into two groups, one to secure the entrance, the other to provide cover. Adriana was part of the latter group, positioned on the ridge overlooking the compound. From there, she would have a perfect view of the entire area. Adriana glanced at the others. Their movements were precise, their faces set with the same determination she had seen in the eyes of countless soldiers before them. But there was something different in this group. They were good, trained professionals, but none of them had the kind of experience that she did. None of them had been forced to make the decisions she had, the moral choices, the sacrifices. This wasn't her first mission of this nature, but it was the first one that felt personal. She had been here before, standing on the edge of the unknown, knowing that one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death, not just for her, but for everyone involved. And as much as she tried to push it away, the feeling lingered, the knowledge that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. They reached the ridge without incident, and Adriana set up her sniper rifle, her hands moving with fluid precision. She adjusted the scope, taking in the view of the compound below. The air was cold, but she hardly noticed. Her focus was entirely on the target. The compound was heavily guarded. Adriana had expected as much. There were guards at every entrance, patrolling the outer perimeter in well-coordinated shifts, but there were also weaknesses, gaps in the patrols, areas where the guards' line of sight was obstructed by the terrain or the walls. She could do this. She had done this before. It was just another mission, just another target, but as her eyes scanned the area, she couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was different. It wasn't just about eliminating a threat, it was about more than that. It was about closure. And for the first time in years, Adriana realized that the ghosts she had been running from were about to catch up with her. The rest of the team had reached their designated points. The signals came in quietly over the comms, a steady stream of updates. Everything was proceeding as planned, but there was an air of uncertainty, a feeling that something was about to go wrong. Adriana couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something critical. She adjusted the scope again, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the entrance to the compound. The target was somewhere inside. The man she had been sent to eliminate. Dmitry Orlov. Orlov was a ghost, an enigma. a man who moved through the shadows, always one step ahead. But tonight, Adriana was going to be the one to find him. She was going to be the one to end this. The comms crackled to life, and Hale's voice came through, steady but tinged with urgency. "Adriana, we've got movement at the east gate. Looks like they're preparing for something. Stay sharp." Adriana's fingers tightened on the rifle. The situation was escalating. The clock was ticking. She had to make the shot. She watched as the guards at the east gate began to shift, their movements quickening. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. "Target in sight," Adriana whispered, her voice barely audible over the comms. "I've got a clean shot. Just need confirmation. Hold your position," Vance replied. "We need to get eyes on Orlov first. Don't engage unless it's absolutely necessary." Adriana's eyes locked on the area around the east gate. There were two guards moving toward the entrance now, and she could see a vehicle approaching, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Her heart rate quickened. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. "Copy that," Adriana said, her voice steady. "I'm still waiting for Orlov." She kept her focus on the vehicle, waiting for it to get closer. The vehicle was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it knew it was being watched. It stopped just short of the gate, and two men got out. Their movements were slow, cautious, but Adriana could tell they were waiting for something. "Orlov's here," she muttered under her breath. "He's not going anywhere." The plan had been simple. Get in, get the target, and get out. But the more Adriana watched, the more she realized that this wasn't going to be as straightforward as she had hoped. Orlov was a master of the game. He had been operating in the shadows for too long. She watched as the men around him moved quickly, as if they had rehearsed this moment 100 times. It was too coordinated, too precise. Something was wrong. Her instincts flared. There was no more time to wait. She had to act. She exhaled slowly, taking the shot. The bullet flew through the air, its path steady and true. It hit the guard square in the chest, sending him tumbling to the ground. The compound erupted into chaos. "Move!" Vance's voice rang through her earpiece. "Go, go, go!" Adriana slid into action, her rifle still trained on the target. The rest of the team began to move, converging on the compound. She kept her eyes on the chaos below, her mind working at a mile a minute. They had to move fast. Orlov was still inside, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Adriana moved swiftly through the compound, her senses heightened as she navigated the dark hallways. The air was thick with tension, each step a calculated risk. She had crossed the point of no return. The mission was supposed to be simple: get in, eliminate Orlov, extract the intel, and get out. But the deeper she went, the more she realized there was something much darker at play. The silence around her felt unnatural, almost suffocating, the kind of silence that only existed in places where secrets were kept. She had learned long ago not to trust it. Every creak, every distant sound made her muscles tighten, her grip on her weapon more firm. The files she had uncovered earlier, the ones she had risked everything to access, held more than just strategic data. They were a roadmap, a blueprint of something much larger than anything Orlov could have been orchestrating. She wasn't just dealing with a rogue operative anymore. She was up against an entire network of people who had manipulated her every move. Adriana's eyes darted around the dimly lit corridor, checking for any signs of movement. She was getting closer. Orlov was somewhere ahead, but so was the truth. She had come here to eliminate him, but now she wasn't sure what she was truly hunting anymore. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but she didn't have the whole picture yet. Her comms crackled to life, breaking the silence and snapping her back into focus. "Adriana, we're almost there. Hold tight." Vance's voice came through, steady and calm, but with a hint of urgency. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't afford to fail now, not with so much at stake. "I'm almost at his location," Adriana replied, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "Just a few more minutes." The hallway ahead of her narrowed into a small, reinforced door. Beyond it, she knew Orlov would be waiting. It wasn't a question of if anymore, it was about how he would react once she got there. Would he fight? Would he surrender? Or was there something else waiting behind that door? As she reached for the door's handle, a wave of unease washed over her. Something was off. She could feel it in her gut. She had been in enough high-stakes situations to know that instincts weren't always wrong, but she couldn't afford hesitation. She pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with scattered papers, blinking monitors, and old equipment. And there, standing by a large desk, was Orlov. He didn't move as she entered, his back turned to her. He was focused on something on the desk, likely the same files she had just been reading. But the moment the door clicked shut behind her, he turned, his cold eyes meeting hers. There was no surprise, no fear, just a steady gaze that seemed to pierce through her. Adriana's grip tightened around her rifle. The moment had arrived. She had prepared for this, trained for it, lived for it, but in this moment, facing Orlov, everything felt different. There was no rush of excitement, just a quiet clarity, the calm before the storm. Orlov didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he studied her, his gaze calculating, as though he was measuring the very air between them. "You came," he said, his voice smooth and even, almost amused. "I didn't expect you to, but I suppose it was inevitable." Adriana didn't respond. She couldn't afford to waste time with words. She stepped forward, keeping her rifle trained on him. "I'm here to finish this," she said, her voice cold. "You're coming with me." Orlov's lips curled into a faint smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're the only one with a plan, don't you?" Adriana's eyes flicked to the monitors on the desk. She knew what he meant. He wasn't just a rogue agent anymore. The network she had uncovered wasn't just about him. It was about something far bigger, and she had been playing right into their hands. But she wasn't about to back down. She was here to finish what she started. "You're not walking away from this, Orlov," she said, her finger twitching near the trigger. "Not now. Not ever." For a brief moment, Orlov just stood there, his expression unreadable. But then, without warning, he moved. The room exploded into action. Orlov dove behind the desk, his body low to the ground as he drew a sidearm from beneath the desk. Adriana instinctively fired, the bullet hitting the wall just above him. But he was already moving again, rolling across the floor, taking cover behind a stack of crates. Adriana didn't hesitate. She was already moving toward him, her rifle at the ready. The fight was on, and there was no turning back. "Is this really what you want, Adriana?" Orlov called from behind his cover, his voice louder now. "You think you're the hero in this story?" Her pulse was steady as she advanced, each step calculated. The shots he fired were wild, but she knew he was trying to throw her off. He wasn't a bad shot, he was trying to distract her, but she didn't fall for it. "I'm not your hero, Orlov," she called back, her voice unwavering. "But I am the one who's going to end this." She moved quickly, darting behind a stack of crates herself, keeping her body low. Orlov was still trying to move, still trying to get a better shot, but he was off balance, and that was her opening. In one smooth motion, she popped up, fired again, and hit him square in the shoulder. Orlov stumbled back, his gun falling from his hand as he staggered to regain his footing. Adriana didn't wait. She closed the distance between them in seconds, her rifle now aimed directly at him. Orlov had nowhere to go. "Game's over," she said, her voice steady, but inside she could feel the weight of what she had just done. This was it, the moment of truth, but as she reached to secure him, Orlov smiled. "Don't think this is the end, Adriana," he rasped, blood dripping from his shoulder. "You've been playing their game all along, and you've just made it worse." Adriana's stomach clenched. What did he mean? Before she could react, the compound's lights flickered. The hum of the system, the alarms, it all shifted, suddenly louder, more ominous. Something was happening, something she didn't understand. Orlov's words echoed in her mind. "You've just made it worse." The sharp hum of the compound's emergency lights was the only thing that could be heard now. It was a sound that normally signified chaos, a signal that something was wrong. But Adriana knew better than to be distracted by it. Orlov had fallen. She had him, almost, yet the unease in the air hadn't lifted. Orlov's words echoed in her mind. "You've just made it worse." It was a cryptic, threatening statement, and it hung in the air like a dark cloud. What did he mean? She couldn't afford to dwell on it, not now. The mission had to be completed. No matter what else was happening, she had to stay focused. She kept her rifle raised, aiming it steadily at Orlov, who was still on the floor, clutching his shoulder. His blood was staining the concrete beneath him, but his eyes were cold, unwavering. There was no sign of fear, no sign of submission. He was a dangerous man, but he was cornered now. And yet, Adriana couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Her fingers twitched on the trigger, but she stopped herself. Not yet. She needed answers. "You said it would be worse," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge that betrayed the tension running through her. "What did you mean by that?" Orlov smiled faintly, a painful, blood-streaked grin. His breathing was labored, but he didn't look afraid. He knew something she didn't, and that made him more dangerous than any physical wound. "You're still too naive, Adriana," he rasped, his voice thick with pain. "You think you're the one controlling the game, but the truth is, you've already lost." Her stomach tightened. Was he trying to mess with her head, or was there something she wasn't seeing? "I'm done listening to your games, Orlov." Adriana moved closer, her rifle never wavering. "You're coming with me, alive or dead." Orlov's eyes flickered toward the door, and for a brief moment, Adriana's senses flared again. Something wasn't right. The shift in his gaze wasn't an idle glance. He was looking for something or someone. Without warning, the door behind her slammed open with a deafening bang. Adriana whipped around, but it was too late. Two men rushed in, dressed in tactical gear, their weapons drawn. They were fast, and Adriana had no choice but to drop to the ground, avoiding the immediate blast of fire as the men opened fire. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the shots that whizzed past her. Her mind raced. Orlov had planned this. He had known all along that help was coming. She had walked right into the trap. Adrenaline kicked in. Her rifle was still at her side, but the cover was gone. She needed to think fast. Without thinking, Adriana grabbed the nearest piece of equipment she could find, an overturned table, and shoved it in front of her as a makeshift barrier. The gunfire stopped momentarily, and that was enough. She fired back, her shots clean and precise, aiming for the men's legs to slow them down. One of them dropped to the ground, but the other kept advancing. Her mind flashed to Vance's earlier message. "Stay focused," the words echoed in her ears, but how could she focus when she was being hunted in the heart of the compound? "Adriana, move!" Vance's voice came through her earpiece, snapping her back into the moment. The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. The plan had changed. She had no time for hesitation. She had no choice now. Adriana dashed for cover, zigzagging through the hallway as the remaining soldier fired on her. She could feel the heat of the bullets whizzing by, but she didn't flinch. It was either get to the next room or be caught in a crossfire she couldn't survive. She dove behind a large pillar, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she crouched down. The sounds of the soldiers closing in made her ears ring. She had only seconds. Looking around, her gaze fell upon a small ventilation shaft at the far side of the room. The opening was small, just big enough for her to squeeze through, but it was her best shot. The soldier was getting closer. Adriana didn't hesitate. She pushed herself off the pillar and rushed toward the shaft, her body a blur of motion. She threw herself inside, scraping her arms and legs on the metal edges as she twisted and turned, trying to move faster. Behind her, she could hear the soldiers' footsteps getting closer. She wasn't going to make it without backup. "I'm in the vent system," she shouted into her comms, her voice strained but steady. "I need a distraction. Now!" The sound of gunfire behind her told her that the men weren't far behind. But just as her hope began to falter, the unmistakable sounds of explosions rang out through the compound. The walls shook as a series of carefully planted charges detonated, sending debris flying into the air. Adriana's heart leaped into her throat as she crawled faster, using the momentary chaos to her advantage. It wasn't just the soldiers she had to worry about anymore. The entire compound had become a battlefield. Every second counted. "Move now!" Vance's voice crackled through her comms, harsh and urgent. "Get out of the compound! It's going to be locked down soon." Adriana's pulse raced as she navigated the dark tunnels, the noise of the explosions slowly fading into the distance. The farther she went, the clearer the path became. She could make it. She had to. The exit was close now. She could hear the muffled sounds of her team's footsteps echoing from the other side. As she emerged from the ventilation system, she sprinted toward them, her breath coming faster with each step. Just as she reached the extraction point, the door slammed shut behind her, the sound of footsteps behind her fading into silence. The chase was over. Her team was already gathered, weapons at the ready. The blast from the explosions had shattered the compound's defenses, but the real battle was only just beginning. "Adriana, are you all right?" Vance asked, his voice calm but concerned. She nodded, her mind still racing from the adrenaline. "I'm fine, but we're not done yet." The files she had retrieved weren't just about Orlov. They were about the bigger picture, the conspiracy that stretched far beyond the walls of the compound. And now the real question was, who was behind it all? The game had only just begun. Adriana's heart raced as the explosion's reverberations still echoed in her ears. The compound had been chaotic, the blast tearing through the once secure halls with an overwhelming force. She barely registered the weight of the rifle in her hand as she sprinted toward the extraction point, her mind racing through the events that had unfolded. Orlov's disappearance, the ambush by his men, the sudden realization that everything had been much more complex than she had thought. Her team was waiting just ahead, crouched down behind a stack of crates in the shadows. The flickering emergency lights cast long shadows across the ground, making it hard to tell if the area was safe. But there was no time to waste. She had to move, had to get to safety, and most importantly, had to ensure the intel she'd retrieved wasn't lost. As she approached her team, Vance's sharp gaze met hers. His eyes flicked to the file clutched tightly in her hands. Without a word, he extended his hand toward it, and Adriana passed it to him. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual, the usual cool authority replaced by something else, something uncertain. Adriana gave a terse nod. It's done. But this mission isn't over. Vance didn't respond at first, only flipped through the pages quickly, his eyes scanning the contents. I was afraid of this. The words hit harder than any bullet. Adriana didn't need to ask. She could see it in his expression. She knew it had all been part of something bigger. Orlov's intel wasn't just about exposing a rogue operative or taking down a terrorist group. It was the beginning of a much larger operation, a covert network operating in the shadows, and now she was in the heart of it. We need to move, Vance muttered, snapping out of his silence. The extraction point has been compromised. We're not safe here for long. Adriana didn't need any more convincing. She turned and began walking, signaling the rest of the team to follow. As they moved through the darkened halls, the weight of the situation began to settle in. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Every turn, every corner seemed to close in tighter, like a trap waiting to snap shut. They reached the secondary exit where a transport vehicle awaited them, its engine humming softly in the night. It was an old, inconspicuous vehicle, nothing flashy, just what they needed to get out of the compound undetected. Adriana climbed into the back, taking a seat with a view of the road. Her thoughts wandered back to Orlov, to the web of lies and deceit he had spun. She had walked right into it, had done everything by the book, but now she saw the truth. She was just a player, a piece in a game much bigger than her. The transport vehicle rumbled forward, and for the first time in a long while, Adriana allowed herself to relax. Just a little. But her mind wouldn't let go of the questions that had been haunting her from the moment she had set foot in the compound. Who was really behind all of this, and how far did the conspiracy go? The drive was quiet, but the silence was thick with tension. Her team, normally chattering and making jokes, was now subdued. Even Vance had fallen quiet. They all knew what was coming. They all knew that getting out of this mission wasn't the end. As the vehicle rounded a bend, Adriana caught sight of something in the distance. A shadow. A figure moving against the backdrop of the darkened landscape. She couldn't make it out at first, but her instincts were already kicking in. Something wasn't right. "Stop the vehicle!" she ordered, her voice cutting through the silence. The driver obeyed without question, his hands tightening on the wheel. "What is it?" Vance asked, leaning forward in his seat. His eyes narrowed as he followed her gaze, but whatever it was too far to make out. Adriana motioned for him to stay back. She needed to handle this alone. The vehicle came to a halt, and without saying another word, she pushed open the door and slipped into the shadows. She moved cautiously, keeping low to the ground, her rifle at the ready. The figure was still there, just ahead, moving swiftly but with purpose. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't anyone she recognized. But there was something in the way they moved, in the way their presence seemed to disturb the air around them. That sent a cold chill down Adriana's spine. She waited for a moment, holding her breath, listening for any sound. The figure stopped just a few yards away and turned slightly as though sensing her presence. Adriana's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't move. She had been trained for this moment. She could outlast anyone. She could wait for the perfect shot. But this time, she wasn't sure she was ready for the truth that was about to come to light. The figure turned fully, their face coming into view. It wasn't Orlov. It wasn't even someone she had seen before. The person standing before her was a woman, tall, with short black hair and an expression of cold determination. Her eyes met Adriana's, and in that brief moment Adriana knew this wasn't random. This wasn't some chance encounter. This woman was part of something much bigger. someone sent to finish the job that Adriana had failed to complete. "What's your name?" Adriana demanded, keeping her rifle steady. Her voice was firm, though her mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements deliberate. "You're not the only one who's been watching," she said, her voice low and calm. "You've made things difficult, Adriana. You should have stayed out of it." Adriana's hand tightened on her rifle, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Something told her that this was more than just a confrontation. This was the beginning of the end. "What do you want?" Adriana asked, trying to gauge the woman's intentions. The woman smirked, stepping closer. "I don't want anything from you." "But you, on the other hand, have made it difficult for the people who really control things." Adriana's mind raced. She had been chasing shadows, but now, standing before her, was someone who had answers, someone who could tell her everything. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the woman continued, "but you will." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The pieces fell into place, and the truth, dark and ugly, became clear. Adriana had thought she was playing a role in a mission, but she had been a pawn in a much larger game. A game that was now bigger than Orlov, bigger than anything she had been told. She was in too deep, and now she had no choice but to play along. The woman stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. Adriana didn't follow. She couldn't. The game had already started, and there was no way to turn back now. But as she walked back to the vehicle, she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The air in the compound had never felt as heavy as it did now. The silence was almost oppressive, thick with the knowledge that everything had changed. Orlov was no longer the primary threat. He had been a piece on a much larger chessboard, and Adriana had just moved herself into the center of that game. But the rules of this game were still unclear, and she wasn't sure whether she was playing to win or to survive. She slid into the back of the transport vehicle, still gripping the files she had risked everything to acquire. The information within those pages was worth more than gold. It wasn't just intelligence, it was the key to exposing a hidden web of power, corruption, and control that reached far beyond Orlov's operation. And now, with every passing minute, the truth of it all seemed more terrifying. The door slammed shut, and the vehicle rumbled to life, carrying them away from the compound. The ride was bumpy, the sound of the engine humming loudly in the background. Adriana kept her eyes on the files, her fingers lightly grazing the pages as though feeling the weight of them. There was no turning back now. But she wasn't alone. Vance sat across from her, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't said much since the operation. He didn't need to. They both knew what was at stake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Vance spoke. His voice was quiet, but the sharpness in it made Adriana's heart skip a beat. "You realize this doesn't end with Orlov, right?" She didn't need to respond immediately. She had known that from the moment she had seen the true scope of what was unfolding. "I know," she replied, her voice steady, though her mind was still processing the enormity of it all. "But it has to start somewhere." Vance nodded, the corners of his lips twitching slightly. "You're right about that. Orlov was the first step, but it's always been about the bigger picture. We just haven't been told the whole story." Adriana let his words sink in. She had been played, no question about it. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand, manipulated by forces far beyond her control. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She had been given only half the truth, just enough to complete the mission, but not enough to see the whole picture. Orlov had been a decoy, a distraction. The real threat had been hidden in plain sight. The road ahead seemed endless, and yet Adriana could feel the walls closing in again. The further they drove, the less control she had over her own destiny. She had the files, she had the information, but she didn't have the answers. And she didn't know who to trust anymore. The vehicle came to a sudden stop, jerking Adriana forward in her seat. She caught herself quickly, her fingers instinctively tightening around the files. The air inside the vehicle was suddenly charged with tension. Vance said, his voice cold and authoritative. "We're here." Adriana didn't need to be told twice. She opened the door, stepping into the night air, the chill biting at her skin as she made her way to the meeting point. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the silence heavier as she moved toward the rendezvous location. Her mind was racing. She was about to meet the people who had been pulling the strings all along, the ones who had orchestrated this entire operation, and she had no idea what they were going to do with her. She was barely a few steps away from the rendezvous point when a voice called out to her from the shadows. "Adriana!" She froze, her body instantly going on high alert. It was a voice she hadn't heard in years, but one that she would never forget. The voice was calm, smooth, yet filled with a quiet authority that sent a chill down her spine. "Don't turn around," the voice continued, a note of warning in it. "Just listen." Adriana didn't need to see the figure to know who it was. She had been expecting this. The past, once buried and forgotten, was now rising again, bringing with it a storm of questions and fears. She had known this moment would come. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the emotions swirling inside her. She didn't have time for games, not now. She needed answers. The figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a familiar face. It was Lucas. He had been missing for years, presumed dead by everyone who knew him, but here he was, standing before her, calm and composed, as though nothing had changed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. "I'm here to make sure you get the truth," Lucas said, his voice low and steady. Adriana's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to hear what he had to say, not now, not after everything she had been through, but something in his words made her stop, made her hesitate. "The truth?" she asked, her voice hard. "You've been playing me, Lucas. You've been lying to me for years. You can't just show up now and expect me to believe you." Lucas didn't flinch. "I didn't lie to you, Adriana. I kept you alive. I kept you safe. You just didn't understand why." Her pulse quickened. "And now? What is this? What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand that you're in deeper than you realize," Lucas said, taking a step closer. "Everything that's happened, the missions, the people you've worked with, it's all part of a much bigger picture. You've been a tool, Adriana. But now you have the power to change the game." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You expect me to believe that? After everything?" "Yes," Lucas said simply, his gaze unwavering. "You were always meant for this, and now you have the chance to stop it." Adriana's mind raced. She had been used. All this time, everything she had done, every mission had been part of something else, a grand scheme she had never understood. Olaf had been just one piece of it. Now, with the files she had stolen, she held the key to unraveling it all. But she didn't know who to trust. Lucas, who had disappeared from her life without a trace, or Vance, who had been with her all along but whose motives now seemed unclear. Her grip tightened around the files. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in her mind. Lucas looked at her with an expression that was both sad and resigned. "You have the power to bring it all down, Adriana. You've always had it, but you can't do it alone." Adriana felt a pang in her chest, the weight of the decision that lay ahead. She had a choice to make, but the truth was, there was only one way forward. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll stop them." Lucas gave a small nod, his face softening just slightly. "Then let's get to work." The world had changed in that moment. Adriana knew it, and Lucas knew it. The game had shifted. The end was near, but it was only the beginning of a new fight, one that would change everything. As the dust settles and the truth finally begins to surface, one thing is certain: Adriana's journey has only just begun. The mission that seemed so simple at first revealed layers of deception, manipulation, and power. What began as a pursuit of a single target has now unfolded into a much larger, more dangerous game. Adriana, once just a pawn, is now at the heart of a conspiracy that could change everything. But even with the truth in her hands, the questions remain: who's really in control? What comes next for Adriana as she walks this thin line between survival and vengeance? The road ahead is uncertain, filled with shadows and secrets that she can't escape. And just when it seems like the answers are within reach, new dangers loom on the horizon. Thank you for joining us on this intense ride through betrayal, secrets, and hard choices. We hope you've enjoyed this journey with Adriana and are left with more questions than answers. Don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a comment on your thoughts, and let us know where you're watching from. Stay tuned for more, because the story isn't over yet, and there's always more lurking in the shadows. VeteranBiker signing off.